Sports Day by Comcast, NBC Universal, and FS is our title sponsor. We're very happy to be celebrating our 6th year this year of this event and celebrating the third annual Women's Sports Day panel. Before things get kicked off, I would like to introduce our moderator for today, Dr. Ellen J. Swansky, who is a professor here in Drexel University Department of Sports Management at the Rowe College of Business. She's an expert in the areas of college athletes' rights, gender equity and Title IX, and gender dynamics in the sports workplace. She has written 2 books, one entitled Women in Sport, Light from Liberation to Celebration, and she regularly collaborates with the Sports Foundation on major research projects, focusing on the status of girls and Dr. S, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Isn't this exciting? Here we are at Women's Day at U.S. Open Squash or U.S. Squash Open. And we're going to get right into our introductions, and how humbling that we have such a stellar panel with us today. I'll begin with Monique and Jocelyn Lamoureux sitting here in the middle. The sisters were the first set of twins to ever play on the United States women's national hockey team. At 12 years old, Jocelyn and Monique led an all-boys hockey team to the North Dakota State Championships. The sisters later went on to play at the University of Minnesota, where Jocelyn finished for first year as all WCHA first team, and Monique finished the year at the WCHA scoring champion and WCHA rookie of the year. They would then go on to the IHF World Championships and have been instrumental in the fight in terms of equal pay for the U.S. women's team. They are currently also volunteering with the Ed Snyder Youth Hockey Foundation, the largest youth hockey organization for disadvantaged youth in the country. They're committed to growing the sport to help increase participation and opportunities. And with the support of partners like Comcast and CCM, Monique continues to help pave the way, and Jocelyn, help pave the way for future gold medalists. So can we welcome both Monique. I suspect that this next introduction is not surprising for a squash audience, but we have Madeline Perry, Director of Squash at the Baldwin School and member of the U.S. national coaching staff for junior teams. She's a former world number 3 on the Pro Tour from Ireland. In her 17-year career, she won 11 WSA Tour titles from 27 final appearances, and celebrating a career high world number 3 ranking in 2011. The Australian Open champion in 2010 in Canberra, where she upset both the 2nd and 3rd seeds en route to the WSA World Series title, has won the prestigious Irish Open trophy 5 times, twice finishing as runner-up. With more than 120 caps for Ireland, Perry has competed for her country in 8 successive biennial World Team Championships and won her 15th Irish title. Can we have a round of applause for that? And saving the best for last, Wendy. We have Wendy Bartlett, who is head coach of women's squash at Trinity College. And Wendy begins her 36th year. She's in her 36th year as head coach at Trinity College, following the 2018-19 season that saw the Bantams finish with a 17-3 record and reach the College Squash Association National Team Cup Finals. Trinity remains the only women's NESCAC champion, winning every season since the inaugural championship in 2007. Um, Wendy has been inducted into the CSA Hall of Fame in February of 2019. In 35 seasons, her career record is 423 wins, 112 losses. And she has also been named NESCAC Coach of the Year in 2012-13, 2014-15, 2015-16, and 2017-2018. And all of that, she is also a tenured professor as well. Can we please welcome Wendy? My gosh, what a time to be talking about the growth of women's sport in the United States. We know that in terms of high school sport participation, that there are over 3.4 million girls participating at the high school level and competing. We know in terms of NCAA participation that it's getting upwards to about 250,000 there, and that's not counting all of the other women involved. If we think back to 1972, that number at the high school level was 1 in 27 girls. That gap has closed to about 1 in 2. I think that that's a fitting setting for us to think and to set the stage for what we're going to talk about today. And in terms of our first question, I really want to learn more about your journey and what sport has meant to you and how it's been a part of your lives. Wendy, I'm going to ask you to start, and then we'll work our way down the panel.
Okay. Well, when I was growing up in the late 60s, there weren't many options for girls like there are now. I mean, nowadays, girls can play soccer, softball, t-ball, whatever. But back then, it was there weren't many options. And so I picked up tennis, and I absolutely loved it, and went on to compete in high school and college. And then I picked up squash right after that. It was hardball squash back then. And it was primarily men playing in old dodgy clubs, but I loved it and I had a blast, and was very fortunate then to get the coaching position at Trinity for tennis and squash. And about 8 years ago, I switched to just squash.
Well, Monique and I grew up, we have 4 older brothers, and there's 6 of us in a 5-year span. So we all played hockey growing up. But I think our mom, she always told us that one of the only sports she could play growing up was swimming and basketball, is what girls could play when my mom was in high school. And so swimming was a sport that our mom pursued, and I think unintentionally she put all of us, but us two specifically, in a bunch of different sports. So we grew up playing a ton of different sports, but hockey was the one that we gravitated towards. Our brothers all played. Our dad played collegiately at the University of North Dakota, and so it was I think just growing up in a competitive household with that many kids playing a team sport was just kind of what we wanted to be a part of, and we're very fortunate that it's worked out with the two of us kind of always being side by side in our career.
Yeah, we grew up playing on boys teams. There wasn't a girls team available for us to play on until we were in 6th grade. And so if we wanted to play hockey, we had to play with the boys. And that was for soccer, that was a case for a little bit as well. So if we didn't have the option to play on a girls team, our parents would just put us on a boys team. And so that was just kind of the environment we grew up in. And our parents, they always tried to provide us with the same opportunities as our brothers, no matter what sport it was. And so that's just how we just always we were equal to our brothers, and not because our parents like, well, we want you guys to have all the same opportunities. It was just kind of how they were, and which is in our minds is kind of true equity, because there's no thought behind it. That's just the way it was. And so we were extremely fortunate to grow up in a household where our parents supported everything that we did, just like our
brothers. We share that. I have 6 brothers, so that could be a whole other program. We'll talk about that later. Madeline, your journey is very different than that. Can you share that with us?
I obviously come from a small town in the middle of nowhere in Northern Ireland, and sport was just such a huge thing from a young age, and I never remember feeling that there was any difference in male and female. I could just do whatever I wanted, so I think I just sort of ignored it or didn't notice it, but I played in every sport team I could. I remember playing with the boys soccer, in school break or school lunch. And I do remember my brother telling me that girls didn't play squash when I asked could I try it. And so then the next day, parents took me to try squash, and then I loved it from that moment on. But obviously, all of those sports and being able to play tennis, athletics, whatever I wanted to do, sort of give me that amazing grounding for then going on to be a professional athlete later in life. So I think in terms of opportunity, mine was sort of the perfect kind of childhood for a female. It was great.
Um, I think it's fair to say that that all of us in this room really share a conviction around sport and around the importance of sport. But in order to create change and in order to create awareness, I think having a conversation about what those takeaway values are, what those things are that are so close to our hearts as we move on into the world is very important. And so I'm going to ask the twins to begin on this, if you would, and really just share your thoughts about the deep values that people can take away from the sport experience.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why we love team sports is just that interaction with your peers and coaches and whatnot. And when we talk to kids and other teams, it's what are the takeaways from sport? It's not other than the sport and that skill set itself. It's being accountable, showing up on time, being a good teammate, dealing with adversity, taking direction from coaches, especially even if you may not like them at the time. And so being able to take those lessons away from your sport, I think is the best way to learn them and the most fun way to learn those things. But it translates into everything you do, whether that's if you're in school, in the working world, whatever it is. I'd be hard pressed to find a job where you never have to actually interact with at least one other person. And so you're always interacting with people, and those are lessons I think that go so far beyond sport and into life itself.
Yeah, and I think from an individual standpoint, when you put the work in and day out to be the best you can as an athlete, that's where you learn true confidence. Someone can't give it to you, someone can't take it away from you. It's something that you know within that you can finish the task at hand or perform at a level that's going to help you or the team win. And so I think, especially for young girls, it's such an important lesson to learn that, especially with how social media is these days, it's having that true confidence and self-belief that you can do what you set forth to do, what you put time and energy into. You can do that, but you can't let a coach or a teammate give it or take it away from you. And so I think through the work ethic of trying to perform at your best at any stage of athletics is important.
What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I've always just played individual sports, but I do feel that particularly when you're growing up and there's so many changes and so many things thrown at you, life can seem out of control at time. And at least for me, when I got on that court, I always felt like I was in control. And that was a really good feeling. It was such a great outlet. And I could set goals and I could, strive for them and work hard and have the setbacks, but then bounce back. And those are valuable lessons, I think, that have still stayed with me. And I think for any youth playing sports, they're lifelong skills that are so important for your character and development and the rest of your life.
Madeline.
I think obviously all of the values that everyone has mentioned, and personally for me, the journey from that childhood sport to my professional career, how the drive that I had, to move away from Northern Ireland without not a lot of background with coaching and any structure to what I'd done, to really having that self belief to push my career. And then I also felt like on court I was able to become a different person. Off court I was very, very quiet, very shy. And then all of a sudden on the court I was feisty, I was competitive, and some of my friends came to watch me and said, "You're like a different person." Which apparently, according to my sports psychologist, was a good thing, because then I could transition between the two. But it was just something for girls or females playing sport, that's okay. It's not, that's a good thing. It's just as girls should be allowed to do that as much as any male. So it was kind of a release for me. So now, obviously not competing, I'm kind of looking to find that somewhere else. So hopefully I find it in the world of coaching or something. But that drive and really desire to succeed. So
Yeah. It, and you've all beautifully described in your own ways, the attachments that we have and sort of the things that sport brings out in us. And so one of the realities that we know about our sport environment at present is that as much as we've seen a tremendous growth in girls and women's sport, what we also know is that girls start sport later in their lives. We know that there's a large gap in terms of participation between boys and girls. And we also see this uneven development in terms of opportunities for girls and women throughout the entire sports system, whether it's youth level or whether it's professional opportunities. And so I'm going to ask you to offer your thoughts on a challenge that you think is happening in your respective sports and the things that you would like to see changed or ways that we could go about meeting some of those challenges. So Wendy, I'm going to start with you in terms of how we address some of the challenges relative to girls and women's participation.
Well, in squash, there definitely needs to be more access to public facilities, easy access. I mean, Madeline was talking about in Northern Ireland, there were just courts there and she just went right on the courts. There was no, club you had to join or anything like that. And I think that is the biggest factor is in the United States. And if we're going to increase participation for girls and boys, we have to have much easier access, more public facility, more public squash clubs, and a lot more of the role models with female coaches. That would really make the girls really eager to play and want to play.
Madeline, what do you think?
I think the governing bodies or the associations, there needs to be an identification that it's the social aspect is extremely important for females and for anyone doing a sport. Just that it needs to be a fun environment, and that shouldn't be lost, and try to encourage. I think the more participation you can get and group. I just remember looking back to my childhood, there were a really large number of girls that played at my courts for whatever reason, but that's what made me want to go. It wasn't always the sport, that it was seeing my friends, or so it's really trying to use that aspect, or whenever marketing is done with the facility, I just feel like that fun environment is the key to all sport really. Obviously the coaching and things, but if it's not fun, then you're not really going to progress or get larger numbers.
And all of the research tells us this, that for both boys and girls, if it's not fun for them, then they're not sticking around. So that can't be underestimated. Monique, what is your take on this question?
For us, it's kind of a twofold answer. So from an NGB standpoint in USA Hockey, so our team went through its own gender equity issues back in 2017, and our team had hired lawyers in 2015, and we were looking for, we weren't looking for equal pay to our male counterparts because it's comparing apples to oranges because they're in the NHL and supported very differently, but we were asking for a livable compensation, more marketing and resources in that regard, but then also more funding for the grassroots level for girls hockey, because at a fundamental level, hockey needs to become a more diverse sport. But we essentially made no progress in a 1.5-year span, and then 2 weeks before the World Championships in 2017, our team announced that we were not going to go to the World Championships, and so 2 weeks before we're hosting, we said we're not going, but then our entire national team pool and essentially every college U.S. born player stood with us in that because they tried to replace our team, and so with that we were able to sign a 4-year contract with USA Hockey, and they had maternity benefits which no players had before, and we're actually the first 2 players to reap the benefits from that. But essentially we're trying to change the future so the next generation doesn't have the same struggles that we had going through the national team pool. But if we can grow it from a grassroots level and just have more girls signing up, that's the big ticket item for us as a national team and making it more accessible. But then there's also the professional hockey side of it.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to note that to grow the sport, you need the best players in the world to continue to play. So we need the national team support from our national governing bodies, but then the number of participation numbers within USA Hockey, it shows that there's always a spike in girls hockey across the country after an Olympic year, and NBC does such a good job of broadcasting the Olympics and sharing stories. And so hockey is, for us, on a pedestal during the Olympic season. And then we go away for 3 years and then we come back on another Olympic cycle. And so now.
And we train in between those cycles. We're not just sitting around not doing anything for 3 years.
Yeah. So it shows that, when young girls, when parents can see, oh, there's women's hockey, there's an Olympic stage, and they see that we're more accessible, more girls go and play. So now how do we have hockey all 4 year, all the time, every single year? How do we get more opportunities for girls to go see that there is an opportunity to play at the college level or even beyond if you're good enough? And so we're working on trying to create a sustainable professional option right now, and the 120 best players in the world have created a players association and have opted out of playing in the current professional landscape that exists right now in North America, in hopes that there's a more sustainable option moving forward.
I think that you've really given us a beautiful lead in to a larger conversation about how we begin to change the landscape in terms of sport overall. For so long, we've had a sport that's conceived of as women's sport and men's sport, but many of the dialogues that we're talking about, and the things that you were talking about relative to your workplace, are things that really have to do with player value. They have to do with how you're treated in an employment setting, and basically how women can go about doing their jobs in this environment. So, sort of taking that a little bit further, what do you think relative to your sport in particular? You've talked about the pay equity case. Do you see other kinds of things from an infrastructure point of view that need to be done in order to advance the interests of women's hockey and women's professional sport overall?
Yeah, well, I think it's really important to note Sue Bird has been very vocal the last couple of weeks about the investment gap, specifically in the WNBA, and so it's great to hear someone talking about that who has the platform to be heard, because I think there's always two sides of an argument when you're talking about women's sports and how female athletes should get paid, and one side is normally, oh, well, they don't bring in the money that men bring in, so they shouldn't get paid that. And then the other side is, well, how can they bring in that money if there isn't the investment in the sport? And so you can't even talk about pay equity in sports if you don't have the investment side of it. And it's taken years and years for these professional sports in North America to get to where they are, but they've spent millions and millions and millions of dollars to do that. And so I think it's really important that at the professional level, that's what needs to happen, is you need the investment. And if you want players to treat it like a full-time job, you have to pay them like it's a full-time job. In the WNBA, the players are going over to Europe to play in a second season, basically, to get more games and to get paid more. And so I think that's a very important point to make right now with where women's professional sports is at in North America.
And with two coaches on our panel, one of the realities relative to college coaching is that 2 in 10 head coaches of teams at the college level are women, 2 in 10, and that really says something about the environment. And Wendy, based on your experience and and the life that you've had in coaching, what kinds of things do you think should be changing relative to gender equity in that space?
I mean, for women coaches?
Yes.
Well, I think in squash, one of the problems now is that the majority of teams are combined in the sense that it's one coach for the women and that same coach for the men. So in general, they're going to be hiring a male coach to coach both teams. And right now, there's only 3 women that are coaching women's teams. There's myself, there's Gail Ramsey at Princeton, there's Erin Robson at Mount Holyoke. And there's 4 women that are coaching, only 4 women that are coaching men's and women's team. And this is out of 32 teams. So you have Shona Kerr at Wesleyan, you have Nikki Clement at Haverford, and you have Pam Ackerman at Denison, and Larissa Stevenson at Chatham University. So you can see that's a small percentage of women that are coaching um, college squash.
Mm-hmm.
And so more women need to be hired to coach both men and women. I mean, it can be done, or they split up the program so that there's a women's team and a men's team.
Mm-hmm. Madeline, what are your thoughts on this?
I think definitely in terms of the coaches, I noticed it more when I transitioned from a player to coach. As a player, I didn't really, I noticed it in terms of the prize money and the scheduling, which PSA have changed obviously since I retired 4 years ago, which is absolutely amazing because there were times in major events when we would be on the back courts from for the first, second, third rounds, and the men would be playing on the show court, on the top level. And just I think what that shows to people watching is not what you want to convey a message of that the promoter and US squash believe that the female and male competitors are equally as valued. So by changing that, that's been a major change because it then gives that equal in every way. So and then in terms of converting from as a player to a coach, I couldn't believe how few female coaches there were. I don't think I'd ever really thought about it until I then became a coach, and Wendy and I have talked about it a little bit. It's just that trust and that females can coach males as well, because I would hope I could coach males and females to the same ability, and that people would trust me to do that, and same with Wendy. So hopefully, just that culture, changing that culture over time, that we can improve those numbers, because they're definitely we would hope that they would be better in all sports.
Yeah, and it is, it's a really interesting moment, I think, here in Philadelphia as well as nationally, in terms of disintegrating boundaries around things that we never thought would happen. We never thought that we would see women coaching in the NFL. We never thought that we would see women coaching in the NHL. And with the momentum around equal pay, which was on fire this past summer, we're really living in a moment right now in terms of pushing for gender equity. And given that there is this movement and this tidal wave, are there other kinds of things that we should be thinking about in terms of how we can use that momentum to expand on the agenda for girls and women in sport, to keep moving things forward? And Madeline, I'm going to start with you on this question.
Well, I think the perfect position is for US Squash building a new squash center. They have a great opportunity there to make sure that programs are really equally distributed for girls and boys. Obviously, there's a big input from female coaches as well as male coaches, and just trying to set that right, not with a new center and a new kind of start there. There's that great opportunity to set that, and I just think coming the higher up that we can do it, like from the World Squash or US Squash or whatever it is, it then would filter down right through all levels of the game. And I think if we can set that example at a very high level, then it's
Monique.
Yeah, well, I think at an NGB level, when you look, every NGB, their goal is to grow the sport, boys and girls, and that's at the fundamental level. That's the job of USA Hockey, US Squash, US Soccer, whatever it is. That's their job, and so if we can continue to make, I think at the top, if you can continue to make, especially for us, U.S. hockey, women's hockey, you can make us more visible on a year-to-year basis and continue to market and make us more visible and accessible to people, then more people will watch, more people will sign up. And if you can do that, you see what you see on an Olympic year, you see more and more girls sign up. And if we can continue to have that trickle down effect, I think the sport's going to continue to grow. And I think I think you can apply that to any female sport. And I think when you look at U.S. soccer and what they've been able to accomplish in the last 20 years and how visible that team is, I'm sure next year when you look at the numbers, you're going to see a big spike in what's already probably the biggest female sport in the U.S. So if we can, I think, kind of look at what's happened in the last 20 years with certain women's sports and professional leagues and model model after what's been successful, and we apply that to other sports, I think we need to grow female sports.
Yeah, I think it's also, I mean, not to reiterate what she said about hockey, but having women support women's sports, I think, and this might be a little bit more personal of experience, but I feel like families take their young boys to go watch boys' sports or men's sports, or they take their young girls and it's a family outing to a football game or a hockey game. But how often are they taking their young daughters to go see women play, whether that's at a college level or professional level? And now, depending on your community, you might not have a lot of opportunities or any opportunities at a professional level. But even if that's taking them to go watch the local high school girls team that's competing, I think creating more opportunities that young girls and daughters can go watch and see, and hey, you can go do this. I think that's important from a young age. No matter where you're from, there has to be some opportunity that they can go watch girls compete on an athletic stage.
And Wendy.
Well, I think one thing we haven't mentioned yet in squash, which I think has been really transformative, is the SIA programs, the Squash Educational Alliance, and they're booming across the country in major cities where they're taking, they're building these urban squash centers for um, kids to come in, inner city kids, disadvantaged kids to come in, and they're using squash, as the sort of carrot to get them in there. And then they also do a lot of academics and mentoring and so forth and so on. And this is doing this with the SIA programs, they're really expanding squash to all different, minorities, cultures, and to kids across the country. And so I think that's a great start in terms of expanding sports for girls, particularly. And then I also think that upon graduation from college, a lot of the women college graduates don't continue playing. And I took a little mini survey of the Trinity graduates, and the main reason is because of the cost to join a club. So I think if there was some way to make clubs more affordable and accessible, and then getting back to the fun aspect we've been talking about, just have social activities and fun activities that the women could engage in, I think you'd see a huge growth of squash after college.
Okay. We're going to open it up for questions because we have this incredible resource here, and we'd really like to hear questions from you. This happens in class. Everybody always gets so awkward, but really, I'm telling you, the hand went up, so you can all breathe again.
To the what socioeconomic group you see the greatest improvement from? Was it from the football folks and the soccer folks and the city basketball league? And what was the availability of facilities
So I do not know the socioeconomic breakdown. I just know I looked up the USA hockey participation numbers, and it was just growth in percentage.
What you got?
Majority middle to upper class. So I would say Monique. So Monique and I have worked with the Snyder Hockey Foundation for the last 5 years. It's here in Philly, and the amazing thing about the Snyder program is that they've taken over all the inner city rinks in Philadelphia, and kids can all they have to have is a address that shows a Philadelphia zip code, and they can sign up and play for free. So they get equipment for free, practice, everything's free of charge. And so they have just over 1,300 players that play in the Philadelphia area, and hockey is not a, I would say, economically friendly sport, but I think the NHL as a whole is committed to making hockey accessible for everyone. So you're seeing a lot of markets that are NHL markets that are having programs that are more accessible, especially in the inner cities. So there's hockey in Harlem, the Ed Snyder Foundation. I know California has a couple in their markets. So there's that piece of it, but then there's also um, where the area for growth is for girls, is getting more girls participating. And so the boys numbers, I was just looking the other day, sometimes there's a decline in the girls for 1 year, and there's maybe a little bit of inching up, but for girls it's a consistent growth of 3 to 4%, and then it'll spike a little bit more on an Olympic year. And so continuing to focus where the area for growth is and making more opportunities in the towns and in the cities that have ice sheets. And we grew up, we're from North Dakota, so we have frozen ponds that kids go play on. So that's we literally grew up across the street from a pond, and so we would just go skate with our brothers and the neighborhood kids. But yeah, accessibility and having rinks within a reasonable distance uh, can be an issue, and then the cost can also be really hard to participate. But there's programs that are in place to try to fix that.
Okay. There's a question there. There.
Going back to the coaching issue, watching together with other sports as well. To what extent do you believe that the fact that majority men coach the women's teams is due to not enough qualified women actually applying for the job? I'm sure they're qualified women there, but I'm wondering if they're actually applying for the job and choosing to go with them, or is there other reasons?
Yeah. I can tackle that.
So you probably have done research on that.
That was also I just want to make sure. Can I also admit that I thought a hand in the back, but it's actually a part of the mural. So like, so it had the peace sign, but I was kind of like, well, all right. So that's just a little admission you probably didn't need. But to come to your question, I don't think it's an all or nothing response. I think we do have more women out there who do not see themselves as coaches. And Madeline, you were talking about this epiphany moment that you had, that once you started coaching, you noticed that the landscape was different. And there is that kind of epiphany is something that women go through. And what we do know, though, if you look at succession planning, if you look at kind of the way that hiring is done for men's teams rather than women's teams. Historically, there's been much more succession planning on the men's side of things in terms of the coaching tree and who's going to inherit that coaching space. And it's not going to be an open search, right? So there's that gender dynamic to it, but there's also the whole networking dynamic to it, which is, there is a difference between affirmatively going out and finding candidates. We've got a position that we need to hire for. We need to affirmatively pick up the phone, get into our networks, and see who is available. And historically, much more of that networking has been done on the men's side of things than the women's side of things. So it isn't the case that there aren't women who aren't qualified. It's not the case that women don't want to do these jobs. It's a combination of factors, and some of those factors are sex discriminatory. When a woman comes in, there still are questions around whether or not she's going to be more interested in having a family at some point, whether or not she is going to be perceived by her athletes as being a leader. We have research that shows that women internalize authority and matching up authority as being male rather than female. And so there will be female athletes at times who will be evaluating coaches who will say, I want that male coach because he's going to be harder on me, or he's going to be better at his job. So it's a combination of all of these things. And I have to say, this often happens when I'm speaking, that I couldn't help but note. Emma's in there, she knows. But Laura is our associate AD. Is there any other thought that you have about that?
I agree.
Thank you.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
in terms of the squash coaching world, I think it would really help if the male coaches would hire at a minimum, hire an assistant women's coach and groom her for the job so she could build up 2 or 3 years of coaching men and women, so that when a head coaching position opened up, she would feel confident and ready. Now, there are some women, I mean, Madeline could step in right away and coach men and women, but I don't know how, there aren't many Madelines in the world right now. So, I think that's the way to start, is by really trying hard to have assistant coaches who then would become hopefully associate head coaches and then would move on to a head coaching job. That's really the best way to have things change.
Across sports where they are collaborating with the purpose of elevating the stories of female athletes. I just think that one of you made the comment about that's really when you have the ability to be on a big stage and girls see that really inspires them. And I was thinking about USA Archery. They grew fourfold in membership after Hunger Games came out, because and the membership growth came from middle school age girls, just because there was an icon that they could see themselves kind of picking something up. And I think with women in other industries in BC, there's that All Rise collaboration where people are kind of coming together. And I just wonder across the sports if there's some angle in which women can get together to do a combined marketing effort with their athletes.
Well, I think in a general sense, I think women, the top female athletes in whatever sport that they're in, I think in a general sense, I think we all need to do a better job of promoting and supporting one another. And especially, I think you see it in individual and in team sports. In a sense, a lot of athletes, for female athletes, you're not making your money off of your contract from playing your sport. You're making money from sponsorships and going and doing appearances. And so you're doing that all on the side and outside of training. And so there's only so big of a piece of the pie that basically everyone's kind of competing for. But at the end of the day, I think we all have to do a better job of setting that all aside and promoting one another, because by me promoting my teammates and talking about what's going on in other sports and helping elevate whatever it is that's going on. It's helping lift everybody up, and I think just in that general sense, I think the top level female athletes can do a better job of that.
Well, and your question really gets at the heart of part of what we're about, right? Because there's this understanding that if we don't see possibilities for ourselves in the world, um, if we never saw Katniss, we would not be inclined to be an archer. There's that idea. And when we look at sport media over the span of 50 years, while we do see more female athletes because there are more of them, the plain fact of the matter is that the percent of coverage the needle has almost not moved at all. That in terms of mainstream media, it's still about 5% of coverage for female athletes. And so there's a lot of work to be done in that space. And there's a lot of exciting work that's also being done at the same time, but just needs to be expanded. So we have ESPNW, for example, that hosts the summit, which really gets at bringing all of these women together. We've got the Women's Sports Foundation Gala, which is coming up next week, which really has been sort of a premier showcase of bringing all of these women together and really celebrating this expanse of what they do. And here in Philadelphia, through an incubator, a Comcast-funded incubator, a women's vehicle called The Gist has just gotten traction. And so all of these things I think are going to yield benefits, but we just need more attention. We need more demand for women's coverage. And Ashley, you've wanted to say something.
Women's Sports Foundation has become the sort of default clearinghouse for athletes from young girls right through the Olympics and professional athletes in driving participation and equality in their new program, supporting female coaches. So they sort of, and research as well that Dr. S has been spearheading. So they've sort of become that in the United States, and I think people are starting, and they partner with ESPNW as well, but there's nothing sort of global, but in the US, I think that's the WSF is where it's at. And they're doing great work advocating for coaches, athletes.
I think it's important to note, and most recent would be the jersey sales of the women's soccer team and the ratings and viewership that they had during the World Cup. When it's there, people watch. So the 2018 Olympics were in South Korea, so all of our games were at like 1 a.m. here. But our gold medal game was the most watched late night NBC Sports event ever. Not hockey, not women's hockey, not like ever. And so when it's on, people watch it. And so I think like numbers don't lie. So if that's what's happening, then we need to make it more accessible more often for people to watch, because I think there is that demand.
Well, I think the prize money change right now it's at that World Series level, so making sure that that continues through all levels. Also making sure that there's not a huge difference in number of tournaments for male or female. Probably just making sure that all of those scheduling things that I talked about are happening at all levels. I think just touching on the role model thing, like really selling the story of all of the females. They've all got very unique stories, so making sure that those are all marketed and used. I think PSA over the last 4 years, as I've said, since I retired, like it's been an incredible improvement in terms of the female athlete being showcased. So hopefully that can happen through all levels. And I think Nicole David was a really good example of being a world number one and actually getting the publicity that she deserved. She was in probably a country where there were in the US. I understand like it's very hard to compete against the major sports like football, hockey as well. But she was in a country where squash was a bigger sport, so the media that she received was bigger than any of the other male athletes probably. I mean, Nabila will know well. And she got what she, and when we traveled there, the public knew us because we were part of the story. You know, we were competitors of hers. So I think the PSA obviously should continue to push it because I'm not sure that the female players still feel as valued as the males.
We've got a question in the back.
I can't really quote it exactly, but I think that somebody said the Battle of Waterloo is won on the fields of Beaton and Harrow. The idea is that people playing sport get a lot of value from playing sport, and how much maybe women have suffered from not having the opportunity to be on the playing fields of Beaton and Harrow in their life. And I wonder if maybe you could comment about that. Women in positions of leadership and how sport actually contributes to moving up, not just within the sport, but outside the sport.
I'm sure you've done research.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the most compelling statistics that we know of is, 96% of women who are who are working in the C-suite as executives are women who have sport backgrounds, and this translates out economically across the entire system. There was an economist who had been at Penn, and she moved on to Princeton, I think Betsy Stevenson, but she looked at sort of this economic impact over a lifetime. And being able to participate in sport has a profound effect on one's ability to be able to go on into professional life and to succeed there. And whether it's sort of physical grit, whether it's coming up against physical obstacles, or whether it's just dealing with competition or dealing with crises of confidence that you then have to come back from. It's all of those kinds of things. And, we know just from rafts of data that sport participation impacts health across the long term, from childhood all the way through to the end of life. And quality of life becomes so important. So all of those things are things that really get impacted, and especially if we look at it through a racial lens and through a class lens, we see that African American girls, girls of color, immigrant girls, LGBTQ individuals do not have the same kind of access, and all of that translates out throughout the lifetime. Yeah.
I actually I work for CSA, and I just wanted to add to what Hannah said. This year is the first year that the Women's World Championship is actually in any sport. We have it's higher, the prize money is higher than the men's. So through the hard work that organizations like U.S. Squash have put into finding equality, this year the Women's World Championship is going to be held in Egypt in front of the pyramids, and it's 400,000 compared to the men's that is 365,000 in Qatar. And along with Nicole David, who is an amazing legend of squash, when she retired in conjunction with PSA, she launched a legacy campaign to highlight those stories of 7 very talented women, which some of you will see a bit of their stories today on the screens. One of them is Amanda Sobey's story as well, on her resilience of coming back from injury, Tessie Evans, and body image. So she actually created this legacy to empower these women that were coming behind her to fill her shoes, which are very tough shoes to fill. But all of these 7 women also came together with PSA and Nicole to work specifically on a marketing campaign on highlighting the values that each of these 7 women have as athletes. And it has been an absolutely amazing campaign. I encourage you to try to find those videos. We're releasing them every week. Today we actually released World Tired video.
Amanda Sobies was last week about her coming back from snapping her Achilles. And I really encourage you to find those stories, because those are the stories of, Nicole leaving her legacy behind and sharing the story of what these women are encouraging the other players to share the stories and their values. So we're working very hard on keep promoting it, and we are seeing the results by having this amazing event in Egypt with women being involved.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I'm looking at Laurel because it's just about that time anyway.
So, I think if you don't have any other questions, we can wrap things up for this panel. So please give a warm applause for all of our So now we can shift over to the club level for the Women in Sports Day reception, which will be remarks will be starting about 5:15, 5:20. So if you didn't check in when you first arrived, Jenny has wristbands for everyone, and we will see you at the club level soon.
Oh, thank you.